this? Let me see.
I didn't just love her.
What is it?
I worshipped her. Every morning started with her smile. Every night ended with her by my side. I believed our love was unbreakable. Until the day I found out the woman I trusted most was sneaking around with the man I once called my friend. That moment shattered my world, but it didn't break me. I wiped my tears, turned my pain into strength, and planned a revenge so unforgettable that she'd regret every lie she ever told. How I took revenge on my unfaithful wife. Watch the full story to find out. I used to think trust was something you built once and it lasted forever, like the foundation of a house. Once it was there, you never had to question it again. But trust is more like glass. Once it cracks, no matter how small the fracture, it's never the same. I learned that lesson the night I overheard my wife laughing on the phone, a kind of laughter I hadn't heard in years, the kind that used to be reserved only for me. It was a Tuesday, just past 9. I'd come home early from the shop, thinking I'd surprise Clara with dinner and a bottle of her favorite wine. Work had been slow, and I thought maybe spending a quiet evening together could remind us both of what we used to have. But when I opened the front door, the house was filled with a different kind of warmth. The soft glow of candles in the living room, and Clara's voice floating from the kitchen, light and playful. I moved quietly, not wanting to ruin the surprise, and that's when I heard her say his name. "I can't wait to see you again," she whispered, followed by a breathy laugh that hit me harder than any punch I'd taken in the Marines. "Tomorrow night, same place. He'll never suspect a thing." I froze. At first I told myself I must have misheard. Maybe she was talking to her sister, or joking with a friend. But then I heard it again. A man's name, one I didn't recognize, spoken with a tenderness I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. My first instinct was denial. Clara wasn't like that. We had been married for 11 years, built a life together from nothing. We had shared dreams, struggles, late-night talks about our future. She was my best friend, my anchor. There had to be another explanation. I stepped back into the hallway and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm rising inside me. The rational part of my mind told me to walk away, to confront her calmly and ask for the truth. But another part, the part that had been ignored and lied to without knowing, told me to listen a little longer. And so, like a coward I did, she was talking about a hotel across town, describing in detail the room they always booked, the little rituals they shared. She mentioned the cologne he wore, how it lingered on her skin long after they'd said goodbye. And then, the final blow. She said she loved how he made her feel alive again. That was when the wrench I was still holding from work slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a metallic clang. Clara went silent. A moment later, she stepped into the hallway, phone still in her hand, eyes wide with shock. "Ethan," she stammered. "I didn't hear you come in." "Clearly," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Who was that?" "It was just a friend," she said too quickly. "You're misunderstanding." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't insult my intelligence." Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence between us was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. Finally, she sighed and looked away. "We should talk." "Yeah," I said. "We should." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals and conversations. But now it felt like enemy territory. Clara folded her hands and stared at them, refusing to meet my eyes. "It's not what you think," she began. "Then what is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like my wife is planning to meet another man tomorrow night." She hesitated before answering. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. We started talking a few months ago, and it felt harmless at first. I was lonely, Ethan. You've been so distant lately, always working, always tired. I felt invisible." "So you decided to become visible to someone else?" I said quietly. "It's not like that," she said, shaking her head. "It's not about him. It's about us. We've lost something, and I don't know how to get it back." I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, to throw the wine bottle against the wall and watch it shatter like the life we'd built. But instead, I just sat there numb. "Who is he?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." She hesitated again before speaking. "His name is Daniel. He works at the firm. We started spending time together after hours. It wasn't supposed to go this far, but it did." She nodded. tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Ethan, I never meant to hurt you." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like mine. "You never meant to hurt me, but you did it anyway." The conversation went nowhere after that. Clara begged for forgiveness, said she wanted to work on the marriage, but her words felt empty. I told her I needed time to think and spent the night in the garage, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of our life together. The next day, I went through the motions, shower, coffee, work, but nothing felt real. The shop felt too quiet, the air too heavy. My assistant, Marco, noticed something was off. "You good, boss?" he asked. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was broken. I told myself I wouldn't think about Clara and Daniel again, but curiosity, or maybe masochism, got the better of me. That evening, instead of going home, I drove to the address I'd overheard her mention on the phone. It was a mid-range hotel near the river, the kind of place couples went when they didn't want to be seen. I parked across the street and waited. At 7:42 p.m., Clara's car pulled into the lot. My heart sank as I watched her step out wearing a red dress I hadn't seen in years. She looked radiant, glowing in a way she hadn't when she was with me. 5 minutes later, a man arrived. Tall, sharply dressed, the kind of guy who probably never had grease under his nails. They hugged in the lobby, and then they kissed. It wasn't a brief, guilty kiss. It was the kiss of two people who had done this many times before. I could have confronted them then. I could have stormed across the street and torn their little fantasy apart. But I didn't. I sat there in the darkness, watching the woman I loved walk away with another man. And for the first time, I felt nothing. It wasn't rage or heartbreak. It was emptiness. I drove home that night and found Clara already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, and wondered if she felt even an ounce of guilt. Eventually, I turned off the light and lay down on the couch. The next morning, Clara acted like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek before work and asked if I wanted to go out for dinner that weekend. I told her I'd think about it, but I already knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days gathering evidence, messages on her phone, photos from the hotel, call logs. Every piece of proof I needed, I stored away quietly. It wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity. I needed to see the truth laid bare before I made my decision. On Friday night, I asked Clara to sit down with me in the living room. She looked nervous, maybe because she sensed what was coming. "I know," I said simply. "Know what?" "Everything." Her face went pale. "Ethan, I followed you," I said, cutting her off. "I saw you with him. I know how long it's been going on. I know about the hotel, the messages, the lies." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I'm so sorry." "Stop saying that," I said. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught." "I want to fix this," she whispered. "I want to fight for us." "Fight?" I repeated. "You stopped fighting the moment you let him touch you." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I loved you, Clara, more than anything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing." "It wasn't nothing," she said desperately. I was confused. "I made a mistake." "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I said. "This was a choice, and you made it over and over again." The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, I stood up. "I think you should leave." "What?" she breathed. "I'll stay with Marco for a few days. You can use the time to pack your things. I'll contact a lawyer next week." She started sobbing then, the kind of raw, painful sobs that might have broken me once. But I felt nothing. When I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the city blur around me. At some point, I ended up at the old diner on Main Street. Barb, the owner, poured me a cup of coffee and sat across from me without asking questions. "You look like a man who's had his world ripped apart," she said gently. "I guess I am," I replied. She nodded. "It'll hurt for a while, but you'll heal. And one day you'll be grateful you learned the truth before wasting another decade on someone who didn't deserve you." I stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Maybe she was right. Maybe one day I'd be grateful. But that night, all I felt was the emptiness, the kind that comes when the person you trusted most becomes a stranger. Still, beneath the pain, a small ember of something else began to glow. It wasn't hatred or revenge. It was resolve, because Clara thought she had ended the story. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The days after Clara left were a blur for Ethan. Every corner of their home felt haunted. The empty chair at the kitchen table, the faint trace of her perfume on the pillow, the small dent her slippers had left by the door. Yet as heavy as that emptiness felt, something else slowly began to rise within him. Not sadness this time, but a cold, deliberate fire. Ethan had always been calm, the sort of man who believed people's actions eventually caught up with them. But now, after watching Clara and Daniel betray him so shamelessly, he knew that some debts couldn't be left to fate. They had broken his trust, his dignity, and his peace. This time he was going to take all of that back, piece by piece. He started small. First, he cleaned the house from top to bottom, removing every trace of Clara. Every photo of them together was packed into a box and shoved into the attic. Her clothes were donated, her name deleted from his contacts, her favorite mug thrown into the trash. This wasn't bitterness, it was strategy. He needed a clear mind and an empty space to plan what came next. Then he began watching. Daniel was easy to track, a man so proud of his own success that he practically broadcasted every business deal online. Ethan created a fake account and followed every post, every update, every new property Daniel boasted about. Clara, too, was predictable. She had quickly joined Daniel's social circle, attending events as if nothing had happened. Together they looked like a picture-perfect couple to the outside world. And that, Ethan realized, was their weakness. They were desperate for validation. 3 weeks later, Ethan made his first move. He contacted a few journalists he knew from college, people who owed him favors. Quietly, he slipped them bits of information about Daniel's questionable real estate practices, tax evasion, under-the-table deals, and a rumor or two about bribing city officials. Most of it was public record, just buried deep. Ethan didn't even have to lie. He just guided them where to look. Within a month, a small investigative article appeared online. It didn't name Daniel directly, but anyone in the business could piece together who it was about. Investors grew nervous. Meetings were canceled. Daniel's confident smile started to falter. But Ethan wasn't done. His next step was Clara. He knew her well enough to predict her next move. She would try to erase the scandal by rebranding herself. True to form, she launched a social media account as a lifestyle influencer, painting a picture of a glamorous, perfect life with Daniel. Ethan let it grow, then quietly began sending anonymous messages to brands she collaborated with, revealing the truth about how their relationship had begun. Nothing cruel, nothing illegal. Just screenshots of old texts and dates that made it clear Clara had cheated on her husband before running off with Daniel. One by one, the partnership started disappearing. Sponsors pulled out. Events stopped calling. Her online presence, once polished and pretty, became a battlefield of angry comments and unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Ethan focused on himself, and this, he realized, was the most satisfying part of the revenge. He poured his energy into expanding his business, networking with people Daniel had alienated over the years. Some of them, bitter and eager to see Daniel fail, became powerful allies. Together they formed new ventures that slowly pulled clients away from Daniel's company. And every time Daniel lost a deal, every time Clara's follower count dipped, Ethan didn't gloat. He simply noted it down in a small notebook, a silent record of the justice he was building. But fate, as always, had its own sense of drama. One afternoon, about 6 months after the night Clara walked out, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. "Can we talk?" "Clara?" He stared at the screen for a long time. Part of him wanted to delete the message and move on. Another part, the colder, sharper part, saw an opportunity. He agreed to meet. They chose a quiet cafe in the old part of town. When Clara walked in, Ethan almost didn't recognize her. The confidence that once radiated from her was gone. Her eyes were tired, her smile forced. "I'm sorry," she said the moment she sat down. "For everything." Ethan didn't reply. He simply waited. "I thought I was chasing happiness," she continued. "But it's been a nightmare. Daniel's business is collapsing and people, they treat us like villains. I never meant to hurt you like this." The words fell flat. Ethan could see they weren't about regret. They were about desperation. She wasn't sorry for betraying him. She was sorry for losing the comfort she once had. "I'm not the man you left," Ethan said calmly. "And you're not the woman I loved." Tears welled in her eyes. "I want to make things right. There's nothing left to fix." She reached across the table, but he didn't move. The silence stretched between them, a final invisible wall that neither could cross. After a long moment, Clara stood and walked out, shoulders shaking as she disappeared into the afternoon light. Ethan watched her go without a flicker of emotion. It was then he realized revenge wasn't just about ruining their lives. It was about reclaiming his own, and in that moment he felt lighter than he had in years. But there was one last chapter to write. With his company now thriving and Daniel's empire cracking, Ethan decided to host a charity gala, the largest event in the city that year. Invitations went out to politicians, investors, celebrities, and of course one invitation was sent to Daniel and Clara. They couldn't resist attending, maybe out of arrogance, maybe out of curiosity. Either way, Ethan was ready. The night of the gala sparkled with elegance. Cameras flashed, music floated through the air, and Ethan stood at the center of it all, calm and composed. When he stepped up to give his speech, the crowd fell silent. "Tonight is about second chances," he said. "About rising after betrayal, rebuilding after destruction. Because sometimes what feels like the end is only the beginning." His eyes flickered briefly toward Clara and Daniel, standing awkwardly at the edge of the room. The audience, many of whom knew the full story by now, followed his gaze. The message didn't need to be spoken. Everyone understood. When the applause thundered through the hall, Ethan felt something deeper than satisfaction. It wasn't victory over them. It was victory over the version of himself they had tried to break. As the night drew to a close, he stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. The stars above were sharp and bright, and for the first time since that terrible night, he felt free. Clara and Daniel were no longer villains in his story. They were simply lessons. And he was no longer the betrayed husband. He was the man who had built something stronger from the ashes. Somewhere in the distance, he heard laughter from the gala and the faint click of cameras. Life was moving on, and so was he. And so the revenge wasn't loud or violent. It wasn't a headline or a scandal. It was patient, strategic, and deeply poetic. The kind of justice that didn't just punish, but transformed. Ethan had lost a love, yes, but in return he had gained something far greater, his power, his peace, and a future that was entirely his own. Months turned into a year, and the storm that had once consumed Ethan's life finally began to fade. What had started as a tale of betrayal and heartbreak was now something entirely different, a story of growth, redemption, and quiet justice. He had no interest in tracking Clara and Daniel anymore. The revenge had run its course, and his heart was lighter for it. But fate, as always, had one last act to play. Word of Daniel's failing empire spread fast. The investigation that had started with whispers and anonymous tips now had a name and a case file. City officials opened inquiries into his company's financial records, and former employees came forward with stories of shady practices and unpaid wages. One by one, the projects that had once made Daniel a rising star were shut down. Investors withdrew, lawsuits piled up, and the empire he had built on arrogance and greed began to crumble. Clara, too, was slipping. With her influencer career in ruins, she tried desperately to reinvent herself. New pages, new ventures, even a podcast about healing from betrayal. But people hadn't forgotten. Comments under every post reminded her of the scandal, the hypocrisy, the way she had abandoned a loyal husband for wealth. Sponsorships never returned. Invitations stopped coming. And soon, the glamorous life she had once flaunted turned into a lonely, quiet existence. They tried to hold on to each other at first. But when the money started drying up and the scandals piled higher, cracks appeared in their relationship. Daniel grew bitter, blaming Clara for distracting him from his business. Clara accused him of ruining her life and reputation. What had begun as a passionate affair now looked like a cage neither of them could escape. Eventually, Daniel walked out, not in the middle of the night like Clara once had, but during an argument so loud the neighbors called the police. He left with nothing but his car and a suitcase. muttering that he was done with everything. Clara never saw him again. It was ironic, Ethan thought, how betrayal had brought them together, and then betrayal had torn them apart. For Ethan, life had become beautifully ordinary again. His company was thriving, stronger than ever. New clients respected not just his work, but his resilience. He'd even been invited to speak at conferences about business ethics and rebuilding after loss. But more importantly, he was at peace. The ache that had once lived in his chest had faded into a scar, a reminder, not a wound. One crisp autumn morning, as he was reviewing some documents at his office, his assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said softly. "She says it's important." Ethan looked up, and there she was, Clara, standing nervously in the hallway, her hands twisting together. Her once polished appearance was gone. Her clothes were simple, her makeup faint. But the biggest change was in her eyes. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by something much quieter. "5 minutes," Ethan said. She stepped inside, hesitating before she spoke. "I know I'm the last person you want to see." "You're right," he replied, his voice calm but distant. "I came to apologize. Not for forgiveness, I don't expect that, but because I need to say it. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me, and I've paid for it every day since." Ethan studied her carefully. There was no manipulation in her tone this time, no hidden agenda. Just regret, raw and real. "I don't hate you anymore, Clara," he said quietly. "Hating you kept me stuck in the past, and I'm done living there." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't deserve your kindness." "This isn't kindness," he replied. "It's closure, for both of us." She nodded slowly, understanding that this was the end. Not a chance to rebuild, not even a friendship. Just the final chapter closing gently instead of violently. "Take care of yourself," he said as she turned to leave. "I hope you find someone who never makes you doubt your worth," she whispered before stepping out the door. And with that, Clara vanished from his life, truly and completely this time. In the weeks that followed, news of Daniel's downfall hit the headlines. He had been charged with fraud and embezzlement, facing years in prison. His assets were frozen, his reputation beyond repair. Once the man who had everything, he was now a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and business schools alike. Ethan never gloated. He didn't smile when he saw Daniel's mugshot or when he read about the lawsuits piling up. He simply felt finished. The universe had a way of balancing itself, and it had done so without him lifting another finger. Months later, at a charity event similar to the one he'd hosted before, Ethan met someone new, someone kind, genuine, and free from the shadows of his past. Their conversations were easy, their laughter unforced. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by betrayal or revenge, but by hope and trust. One evening, as they walked through a park painted gold by the setting sun, Ethan realized something profound. Clara and Daniel's betrayal had once felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to him. But without it, he might never have discovered his own strength. He might never have built the life he now cherished. Sometimes, he thought, the universe tears your world apart not to punish you, but to rebuild you into someone stronger. And so, as the breeze rustled through the trees and laughter echoed softly in the distance, Ethan smiled, a deep, genuine smile that came not from triumph over his enemies, but from the peace he had found within himself. The story that had begun with betrayal ended not with revenge, but with redemption. Clara and Daniel had lost everything because of their choices. Ethan, on the other hand, had gained far more than he ever imagined: dignity, purpose, and a future that was truly his own. And just like that, the chapter closed, quietly, completely, and forever.